The morning light crept slowly through the slats of the blinds, spilling across Angela Brooks's modest kitchen table. She sat there in her robe, her hands cupped around a chipped coffee mug she'd had for years. The mug had a faint crack along the rim, but she held it gently, as though it was fragile and precious, like so many things she carried in life. On the counter, eggs sizzled in a pan. The smell of butter and pepper mingled in the air, filling the room with a warmth that fought against the tiredness in her bones. Her niece, Kayla, sat at the table in a uniform shirt too big for her, swinging her legs as she waited for breakfast. Angela reached across the table, running her fingers through the girl's hair with the same care she once gave her own son. Kayla smiled, her face lighting up with the kind of innocence Angela worked so hard to protect. "Almost done, baby," Angela said, sliding eggs onto a plate, her voice soft, warm but steady. She hummed as she moved, the old gospel song her mother used to sing when mornings felt heavy. "His eye is on the sparrow," the melody wrapped around the kitchen like a shield. The front door opened, and Marcus stepped inside. At 27, he carried himself with quiet authority that still surprised Angela sometimes. He wore a navy blazer and jeans, a stack of folders under one arm, and a single sunflower in his hand. His smile broke the morning fatigue in an instant. "Mom," he said, holding out the flower like a boy who just aced his first spelling test. "Thought this might brighten up the place." Angela laughed, shaking her head, but her eyes glistened. "You always know how to make a morning softer." He set the flower in an old glass jar on the counter, kissed his mother's cheek, then bent down to hug Kayla. She threw her arms around his neck with a squeal. "Uncle Marcus, you smell like cologne and paper." They all laughed together. In moments like these, Angela forgot the weight of bills stacked on her dresser, or the ache in her knees from double shifts. She forgot the stares she still got in certain parts of town, the unspoken rules she'd learned to live by. What she remembered, instead, was a joy of family. As they ate, Marcus told them little stories about his latest projects, things he brushed off as paperwork, but that Angela suspected were much bigger. He never liked to brag, but she knew he had built something real out there, far from the town that once tried to keep him small. He had gone, worked, fought, and now he was back. She wasn't sure why yet, but she trusted the calm in his eyes. After breakfast, Marcus offered to drive Kayla to school. Angela watched them leave from the doorway, sunlight falling over their shoulders. She felt proud of the man Marcus had become, proud of the love they shared, proud that even after all life's storms, she still had mornings like this. But when the car disappeared down the road, the silence returned. Angela's smile faded. She knew what this town could be like. Its streets held memories of doors closed in her face, of clerks watching her every move, of words whispered behind her back. For all the mornings filled with laughter, there were afternoons of quiet humiliation. She had learned to live with it, to wear her dignity like armor. Still, she whispered a small prayer before grabbing her purse and heading out to work. "Lord, keep me strong. Keep me steady. Don't let this world take my peace." The prayer clung to her as she locked the door, unaware that before the day was over, the strength she asked for would be tested in front of strangers, and the son she raised would have to step forward in ways neither of them could have imagined. The afternoon heat clung heavy over the small town's main street, turning the air thick as Angela made her way toward the department store. Her purse strap dug into her shoulder, and sweat gathered at the edge of her hairline. But she walked with the same upright grace she always carried in public. The town knew her face. She had lived here most of her life. Yet, despite decades of familiarity, she often felt like a stranger in her own home. The store stood like a monolith at the edge of the strip, glossy glass doors and bright banners announcing sales, a place meant to feel welcoming. But Angela knew the subtle chill that lived inside those walls. She remembered moments, the time a clerk pretended not to hear her when she asked for help, the way security guards always seemed to glance her way too often, or how cashiers asked for ID when she paid with card though others passed through unquestioned. Small cuts, never deep enough to scream about, but enough to bleed her slowly. She stepped inside, the cool rush of air conditioning brushing against her skin. The store was quiet mid-afternoon, with only a few customers roaming aisles. Angela made her way to the school supplies section, picking up notebooks in cheerful colors, a pack of pencils, and a backpack her niece had begged for. She held the bag close to her chest, thinking about the smile on Kayla's face when she saw it. As Angela walked, she felt eyes following her. At first, she ignored it. Years had taught her that glances could be weapons. But near the end of the aisle, a young clerk in a red vest stood with folded arms, pretending to rearrange pens, his gaze pinned on her every move. She offered him a small, polite smile. He didn't return it. Instead, he walked to a manager stationed by the registers, whispering something into her ear. The woman turned. Sharp suit, severe blonde hair, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Karen Whitfield. Angela knew of her. The kind of manager who walked the floor with the air of an overseer, scanning for rules broken, mistakes made, or customers who didn't look the way she thought they should. Angela exhaled slowly, willing her heartbeat to steady. She had come for notebooks. Nothing more. She had paid her dues to this town, raised her son, worked long hours, built a life from scraps. She did not need anyone's approval. Still, as she carried her items to the counter, the tension thickened. The young clerk hovered a step behind her, whispering again as if her every move required surveillance. Karen's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. Angela placed the items on the counter with deliberate calm. The cashier scanned them, smiling politely, but when Angela swiped her card and tucked the bag into her purse, the alarm beeped, a harsh, metallic sound that seemed to echo across the entire store. Heads turned. Shoppers froze mid-step. The cashier blinked, uncertain. It's probably just a tag. Before she could finish, Karen stormed over, heels clacking sharply on the tile. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice loud enough for the whole store to hear. "What exactly are you doing with that bag, ma'am?" Angela's chest tightened. Her first instinct was to shrink, to apologize for something she hadn't done, to keep the peace. But she stood tall, meeting Karen's eyes with quiet steadiness. "I paid for it," she said softly, her voice firm but controlled. "You can check the receipt." Karen tilted her head, lips curling. "People say that all the time. Funny how the alarm never goes off for anyone else." The room seemed to close in. Customers watched, whispers spreading like fire. The young clerk smirked, arms crossed. Angela could feel the weight of the humiliation pressing down, but she held her composure, even as her hands trembled slightly on the counter. She thought of Kayla. She thought of Marcus. She thought of every lesson she had taught them, about dignity, restraint, never letting the world strip you of your humanity. So she breathed, slow and steady, and said nothing more. Karen's voice rose again, sharper, hungrier now that she had an audience. "Empty the bag. Now!" And just as Angela reached into her purse to retrieve the receipt, the front door swung open. A familiar figure stepped into the store. Sunlight at his back. Marcus. The bell above the glass door chimed as Marcus stepped inside, his silhouette framed in the afternoon glare. He had just finished a meeting across town and thought to stop by the store, planning to surprise his mother with lunch. Instead, what he saw stopped him cold. Angela stood at the checkout counter, her shoulders squared but her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. A crowd of strangers had gathered, their eyes fixed on her like she was an exhibit in some cruel show. And at the center of it, Karen Whitfield, arms crossed, chin tilted, her voice sharp and commanding. "Empty the bag, ma'am. Don't make me call security." Marcus's jaw tightened. His first instinct was to rush forward, to shield his mother from the spectacle. But he remembered her lessons: restraint, composure, dignity. He forced himself to move slowly, deliberately, across the store. Angela glanced up and saw him. Relief flickered in her eyes, but she said nothing. She wouldn't give Karen the satisfaction of knowing she needed saving. Karen turned to Marcus as he approached. "Sir, we're handling something here. You can step aside." Her tone was clipped, dismissive, the way people spoke to those they assumed had no power. Marcus ignored her, his voice low and steady as he placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "What's going on?" "She tried to walk out with unpaid merchandise," Karen snapped. "Standard procedure. Happens all the time." Angela's face flushed, not from guilt, but from the deep, cutting shame of being accused. She pulled a crumpled receipt from her purse and held it out. I paid. Everything is here. Her voice carried the weight of exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of being questioned, doubted, diminished. Karen snatched the receipt, barely glancing at it before waving it off. Could be fake. We'll need to call the police just to be sure. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, others amused, their curiosity sharpened by spectacle. A young man near the back raised his phone, recording. Marcus's hand tightened on his mother's shoulder. He stepped slightly in front of her now, his gaze steady, unblinking. You don't need to call anyone. My mother did nothing wrong. Karen scoffed, her voice rising further, making sure everyone could hear. Sir, I don't know who you are, but if you want to offend a thief, that's your business. I have a duty to protect this store. The word thief hung in the air like a slap. Angela closed her eyes briefly, drawing strength from somewhere deep, somewhere sacred. She refused to break. Marcus inhaled slowly, his calm unnerving in the heat of accusation. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a slim leather folder. He placed it on the counter, sliding it toward Karen with quiet precision. Maybe you should take a closer look before you humiliate yourself further, he said. His voice was soft, but it carried. The room leaned in. Karen frowned, flipping the folder open. Her eyes skimmed the documents, corporate paperwork, ownership contracts, a badge with Marcus's name embossed in silver. Her face drained of color. Angela stood taller now, the trembling in her hands gone. Marcus's presence shifted the energy in the room. No longer a spectacle. She became something else, a mother, protected, vindicated, unbroken. Karen stammered, her voice faltering for the first time. I don't understand. You don't have to, Marcus said, his tone still even. Because while you were busy humiliating my mother in front of strangers, you forgot to realize whose name is on the deed of this building. This store, Miss Whitfield, he paused, letting the silence stretch, belongs to me. A murmur ran through the crowd. The man with the phone kept recording, capturing every second. Shoppers exchanged looks of shock, some shaking their heads at the scene they'd just witnessed. Karen's lips parted, but no words came. The arrogance that once coated her voice had cracked wide open, leaving nothing but raw, exposed silence. Angela looked at her son, pride swelling in her chest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood in truth, and that truth shifted the balance of the room. In that moment, the humiliation Karen had tried to heap upon Angela dissolved. The shame was not hers to carry anymore. The silence in the store was thick, almost unbearable. Karen still stood with the folder in her hands, her mouth opening and closing like a fish searching for air. The arrogance that fueled her moments earlier drained away under the weight of Marcus's calm certainty. Customers lingered in the aisles, some whispering, others simply staring, their eyes moving between Angela, Marcus, and the woman who just moments ago had commanded the room. Angela, though relieved, felt her heart thudding against her ribs. She wanted to take her son's hand, to thank him for standing between her and this humiliation, but she held back. She knew he was not finished yet. Marcus's gaze swept slowly across the room, meeting the eyes of the customers, the clerks, and finally settling on Karen again. My name is Marcus Brooks, he said, his voice measured, every syllable precise. I didn't just walk in here as someone's son. I walked in as a regional owner of this chain. I bought it 2 months ago. Every one of these stores now operates under my direction. The words landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through the room. The young clerk who had shadowed Angela earlier shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading into something that looked almost like shame. The man with the phone whispered, "Damn," under his breath as his camera continued to capture it all. Karen's eyes darted between the papers and Marcus's steady expression, searching for some foothold. This can't be right. I would have known. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his calm deepening, the way a lawyer might when cornering a witness. You didn't know because you never cared to look beyond what you assumed. You saw my mother and made her into a suspect. That's all she was to you. Not a customer, not a woman who's lived in this town her whole life. not someone paying for her things like anyone else. To you, she was a problem to contain. Angela closed her eyes briefly, feeling the sting of his words. He was naming it, out loud, the quiet indignity she had carried for years, the one she had brushed off so Kayla wouldn't see her pain. He was lifting them into the open. Karen sputtered, clinging to procedure. I was just doing my job. No, Marcus replied evenly. You were doing something else entirely. You were enforcing your bias, and you tried to do it loudly enough to shame her. You used this whole store as your stage. The crowd shifted. A woman near the back crossed her arms and muttered, "He's right." Another man shook his head, murmuring to his companion, "Always the same in this place." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His restraint gave his words gravity. "I worked hard for this," he continued, his gaze steady on Karen. "I left this town years ago with nothing but grit and my mother's lessons. I built companies from the ground up. I earned degrees nobody thought I could. And when I came back, I didn't come back empty-handed. I came back to invest, to create jobs, to give this community something better. And yet, the first thing my mother gets when she shops in my store," he gestured toward her, his hand trembling slightly with suppressed emotion, "is humiliation." Angela blinked back tears, not from pain, but from pride. For years, she had worried that Marcus carried too much weight on his shoulders. Now she saw what he had done with it, how he had turned that burden into steel. Karen lowered the folder slowly, her hands shaking. She opened her mouth again, but no defense would come. Not here. Not now. The moment shifted fully then. Customers began pulling out their phones, whispering, their eyes no longer on Angela, but on Marcus. The story was writing itself in real time, and everyone knew it. Angela finally placed her hand on her son's arm, grounding him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes told him what words could not. That she saw him, that she believed in him, that he had already done more than she could have dreamed. Marcus nodded once, his composure unshaken. "This isn't over," he told Karen quietly, but firmly. "Not for you. Not for this company. What happened today won't be buried in this checkout line. People deserve to know." And in that moment, it was clear that the power dynamic had shifted completely. Karen was no longer the one in control. The son she had dismissed as a bystander stood revealed, not just as a store's owner, but as a man whose strength came not from wealth alone, but from the dignity his mother had instilled in him long before the world learned his name. The days that followed moved like a storm, relentless, unyielding, impossible to ignore. The video was no longer just a local scandal. It had been picked up by national outlets. Headlines appeared on evening broadcasts. Debate panels dissected the incident, and hashtags carrying Angela's name trended across platforms. With every retelling, the store became a symbol, and Karen Whitfield a stand-in for something far larger than herself. But inside Angela's house, the air was quieter, heavy but purposeful. Marcus sat at the dining table. Paper spread across the surface like a battlefield map. Contracts, employee records, customer complaints. He had pulled every thread he could from the company's files, the kind of data that didn't lie. Angela moved through the kitchen in silence, cooking more out of habit than hunger, stealing glances at her son as he worked. A sharp knock at the door broke the stillness. Marcus opened it to find a young woman with a leather briefcase in one hand and fire in her eyes. Jasmine Cole. She introduced herself quickly, her handshake firm, her voice brisk but warm. "I've seen the footage," she said, sliding into a chair without waiting to be asked. "And I've also seen the patterns. This isn't about one manager losing her temper. This company has a history, selective hiring, profiling customers, wage disparities. They've been getting away with it for years because nobody put it all together. Until now." Angela studied her cautiously. "And you think you can help us?" Jasmine leaned forward. "Not just help, expose them. But it has to be done smart. If this becomes about emotion alone, they'll paint you as angry, irrational. We need receipts, literal and metaphorical. Policies, testimonies, paper trails." Marcus listened intently, nodding. He had already begun building a dossier, but hearing Jasmine lay it out gave the fight shape. I've got ownership records, hiring stats, even internal memos from before I bought in. Some of it's damning. Good, Jasmine said, her eyes flicking to Angela. And Mrs. Brooks, if you're willing, your testimony matters. Not just what happened that day, but what you've experienced in this town, in this store. People connect to stories, not just data. Angela shifted uneasily in her seat. She had never wanted to be the center of anything, let alone a national controversy. But she also thought of Kayla, of the next generation walking into a store and being treated as less than human. Slowly, she nodded. If it'll help, I'll tell it. That night, the three of them worked late. Jasmine mapped out a legal strategy while Marcus combed through files. Angela provided details, small moments she had never voiced aloud. Being asked to leave a dressing room for taking too long, watching employees follow black teens through aisles, being offered lower refunds and white customers at returns. Every story was a puzzle piece, fitting into a picture too large to ignore. Word spread quickly that Marcus wasn't staying silent. Former employees reached out, some anonymously, others brave enough to attach their names. They shared stories of being passed over for promotions, disciplined harshly for minor infractions, or quietly fired after speaking up. By the end of the week, Jasmine filed the first official complaint, a sweeping civil rights action that demanded investigation into discriminatory practices across the company. Marcus held a folder with the papers before signing, his hands steady. "This isn't just about Mom," he said, his voice low but resolute. "This is about every person who's been treated like they didn't belong. I own this store, but the truth is, they tried to own her, and that ends now." Angela, sitting across the table, felt something shift in her chest. The fear that had knotted her since that day at the checkout counter began to loosen. Her son wasn't just defending her honor. He was building a wall around their dignity, brick by brick, with truth as a mortar. Outside, the town buzzed with tension. Some people applauded Marcus's boldness, showing up at rallies with signs that read respect is not optional. Others grumbled at diners and gas stations, muttering about troublemakers stirring the pot. But Marcus had no intention of backing down. He knew the fight had only just begun, and the battlefield was moving from the aisles of a store to the scrutiny of a courtroom, a press conference, a nation waiting to see which side of history the town would stand on. The town hall auditorium had never held so many bodies at once. Every folding chair was filled, with more people standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, their faces lit by the glow of phone cameras streaming the event live. The air was hot with anticipation, murmurs rippling like the low rumble of a storm. At the front sat a long table draped in white cloth. On one side, corporate executives in stiff suits whispered each other, their expressions tight, rehearsed. Beside them sat Karen Whitfield, her jaw clenched, her hair pinned perfectly into place, as if order alone might protect her from the chaos she had unleashed. On the other side of the table sat Marcus and Jasmine, their folders stacked neatly before them. Angela sat just behind them, hands clasped in her lap, her posture regal in its restraint. The moderator, a city official in a navy tie, tapped the microphone. "We are here to address recent events that have raised serious concerns about discriminatory practices within one of our town's largest employers. Both parties will have the chance to speak. We ask for respect and civility." The first half of the meeting was filled with corporate jargon. A representative from headquarters leaned into the mic, his voice dripping with polished detachment. "This was an isolated incident," he assured the crowd. "The company does not condone discrimination in any form. We regret any misunderstanding." The crowd murmured, restless. A woman shouted from the back, "That's a lie!" Applause followed, a wave of defiance cutting through the room. Jasmine leaned forward next, her voice sharp, clear, and precise. "With all due respect, this was no isolated incident. We have compiled over 70 accounts of racial profiling, unfair labor practices, and systemic bias stretching back years. We have documentation, testimonies, even internal emails acknowledging heightened monitoring of customers based on appearance." She lifted a thick folder and placed it on the table with a heavy thud. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a culture." The words landed like a hammer. The executive stiffened, whispering hurriedly to their lawyers. Karen shifted in her seat, eyes darting nervously across the crowd. Then Marcus stood. He didn't look at the executives, nor at Karen. He turned his body toward the audience, toward the town. His voice was steady, but it carried, each syllable deliberate. I was raised here. I know what it means to be watched when you walk into a store. I know what it feels like to be doubted before you open your mouth. I left this town because of it. But I came back because I believe we could do better. And when my mother, a woman who worked her hands raw so I could stand here today, walked into my store to buy a backpack for her niece, she wasn't treated like a customer. She was treated like a suspect. Not because of anything she did, but because of who she is. Angela blinked back tears. The room was utterly still, the air charged. Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. What happened at that checkout counter is not new. It's not unique. It's the everyday reality for black families in this town, in this country. But here's the difference. This time, it was caught on camera. This time, there's proof. And this time, there will be accountability. The crowd erupted in applause, shouts of agreement filling the hall. People stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Even those who had come skeptical seemed caught in the tide of truth that swept the room. Karen shot to her feet, her voice shrill as she tried to salvage her authority. This is ridiculous. I was protecting the store. I did nothing wrong. The moderator tried to quiet the noise, but Marcus didn't flinch. He turned to Karen directly, his voice still calm. You weren't protecting the store. You were protecting your bias. And today, you don't get to hide behind policies or procedures. Today, you answer to the people you tried to humiliate. The projector flickered to life behind them, displaying the viral video. Karen's voice ringing out, Angela's calm reply, Marcus sliding the ownership papers across the counter. Gasps echoed again, even though most had seen it before. On the big screen, there was no escaping the truth. By the time the video ended, the executives looked cornered. The lead representative cleared his throat, sweat glistening at his temple. In light of the evidence presented and the public outcry, he began stiffly. The company is announcing immediate changes. A comprehensive anti-bias initiative, independent oversight of hiring and promotions, and termination of employees found guilty of discrimination, effective immediately. The room exploded in cheers. Some shouted justice. Others simply wept. Angela sat motionless, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had dreamed of days when her dignity would not be up for debate. To see her son standing at the front of that room, wielding truth with composure, was more than vindication. It was a kind of redemption she had never dared hope for. Marcus lowered his head briefly, breathing in the roar of the crowd. He knew the fight wasn't finished. Reforms on paper didn't erase decades of pain. But in that moment, in that hall, the scales had tipped. For once, truth had not been silenced. The town was quieter in the days after the showdown, though the echoes of that night lingered like the fading toll of a church bell. Headlines blazed across local and national outlets, social feeds buzzing with clips of Marcus's speech, Angela's calm defiance, and Karen's unraveling. For once, the narrative wasn't about humiliation or criminality. It was about dignity, resistance, and the strength of a family that refused to bow. Angela walked through the grocery store a week later, pushing her cart slowly down the aisle. People she barely knew stopped her, some with shy smiles, others with tears in their eyes. An older black woman pressed her hand. "You held your head high," she whispered. "You made us all proud." A young white cashier at the register, his voice trembling, told her he'd quit his job at the chain and was applying to the community center instead. Angela didn't say much, but she met each gaze with a nod, her presence steady, her pride quiet but unshakable. Marcus spent long hours at the office, fielding calls from lawyers, activists, even national organizations that wanted to partner. He was exhausted, but it was a good kind of weariness, the kind that comes from pushing something forward. One evening, after a particularly long day, he drove out to the small park where he used to play as a boy. The swings creaked in the breeze. He sat on one of the benches, staring at the basketball court where kids now played freely, no one running them off. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something he had kept at bay: hope. That weekend, the community center hosted a gathering in their honor. Not a rally, not a press conference, just neighbors coming together, folding tables lined with food, kids chasing each other in the grass, music floating to the warm evening air. Angela sat surrounded by her sisters and friends, laughter spilling from her lips. It was the first time in months that her shoulders seemed lighter, her smile unguarded. Marcus stood by the edge of the crowd, looking out at the gathering. Jasmine came to his side, nudging him with a grin. "You know, you've turned into a symbol," she teased, half serious. He shook his head. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want this town to stop breaking the backs of the people who built it." "Sometimes," Jasmine said, her eyes on the children running past, "symbols are the first step toward change." Later that night, as the crowd thinned and fireflies lit the grass, Marcus and Angela walked together down the street toward home. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full, layered with everything they'd endured and everything still ahead. Angela slipped her arm through her son's, her voice soft but steady. "Your grandfather used to tell me, we plant trees whose shade we may never sit under. I think maybe you planted one tonight." Marcus glanced at her, his eyes shining. "We planted it together." They walked on, their footsteps slow and unhurried, the streetlights casting long shadows behind them. And in that small American town, for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise.